This is Sybert signing into Red Alert Remastered, where the trees and grass just look so delightful and crashed planes are so much more detailed than they used to be. Anyways, we are on the map Canyon. We are going to be taking a look at 3 games between these two players in the south, with a big swell of infantry as the Cyan, as the Allies, I believe playing UK. This is BikeRushOwnz. And in the north, playing Germany. I don't remember what the actual benefits are. I used to know that stuff, but I've lost it. In the north, as the yellow, this is IamDyNaMic. Dynamic versus BikeRush in 3 replays. I believe they're all going to be allied mirrors. I think these are just random games, perhaps played on ladder. Now, both of these guys are at the top of the ladder. Dynamic is number 1. BikeRush is like number 5 or something like that. But of course, BikeRush has been number 1 in the past. And if you know BikeRush from other games, sometimes people literally complain that BikeRush wins too much. The map is Canyon. We've seen at least one game on this map in the past. I think just the one. It is one of those maps that, because of the 3 different paths on this, you can get very choke pointy, and it can kind of turn into a stalemate. In this case, it's getting ready and going pretty darn quick as BikeRush pushes in with a whole bunch of infantry in the north. He's going to potentially go for some critical infrastructure kills. He has to be careful with this medium tank coming in. He's going to be going for the war factory on the left side. When the medium tank is responding to the forces on the right side, he may actually get the kill on the war factory, and just barely BikeRush is going to get this war factory and shut Dynamic down. No, the crushes are good, the riflemen are good, and Dynamic saves his war factory, just barely keeping it alive as he drops an additional refinery. My gosh, BikeRush within an inch of winning this game almost outright. If he had killed that war factory, the game, it wouldn't have technically been over, but would have been pretty close to over, just because BikeRush would have been able to snowball. He's going to jump on it once again. A couple of riflemen coming in here, as well as the light tanks, and the light tanks circling around to the north. They're trying to avoid the pillbox. A second pillbox going to go down, and BikeRush is barely going to get it. Now, of course, this is significantly delayed from where it was. The double refinery is already up and running for Dynamic. He's already got a couple of medium tanks out of that war factory, so he's already got some production rolling. It's not quite as bad as if he had taken it out the first time. It cost BikeRush that much more to come back and strike down that war factory. Dynamic going to be losing 1 medium tank. The light tanks of BikeRushOwnz just cutting right past the forces of Dynamic, and he's going straight for the MCV. A couple more reinforcing medium tanks and light tanks coming in for BikeRushOwnz, and Dynamic drops both a war factory and a barracks just before the MCV goes down in a blaze of fire. And now BikeRush is just going to be going for the crush, and he may just be able to take Dynamic right here, right now. Dynamic has got 1 light tank out on the field. The barracks is producing riflemen pretty consistently, and he's starting to pepper down these light tanks. BikeRushOwnz is unable to actually finish off any more of these production facilities. He's so low on health on these tanks, and now he's actually just going to be getting pulled apart by these pillboxes. They're doing so much damage. BikeRush loses that. I think Dynamic takes that. He's got 2.5K in the bank, and BikeRush has almost nothing, and BikeRush sold off his MCV, sold off one of his war factories. I didn't realize BikeRush had sold off all of that stuff, but I think Dynamic takes that because BikeRush's tanks are about to die. Man, those pillboxes did so much damage to this medium tank over here, and the medium tank just wasn't getting anything for it. I think BikeRush loses that game number 1, but let's see what happens in game number 2. Which takes us to the map Bullseye. We've got so many gems here in the middle of the map. And indeed, the winner of that last game, confirmed at the end screen, is, in the cyan, as the Allies, IamDyNaMic. And in the north, as the yellow, also playing Allies, putting up an incredible fight, coming within an inch of winning that last game, this is BikeRushOwnz. Of course, here in Red Alert, not a lot of bikes to rush with. However, that infantry rush in the last game and then the light tanks coming after that was the spirit of the bike rush, even if it wasn't a rush with some bikes. Definitely a fast-paced, action-packed match to get us started with, and now Bullseye, a significantly larger map than Canyon. Man, there are a couple of those maps that are just like teeny tiny that have such a short distance via land anyways, like also air, but some maps are close by air but far by land. Anyways, there's such a short distance between the two players on that last map, and now Bullseye, it takes so much longer to get across this map, and even just where your MCV is, it takes a good couple of buildings to get a good position for your refinery before you can actually start harvesting that ore very efficiently. Even like this, Bike Rush, I mean, look at how far his truck has to drive before he even gets any ore. Dynamic is a little bit closer, but actually his truck is driving almost as far to harvest the ore instead of getting the stuff that's right next door to his ore refinery. You know, because the ore harvesting AI is just so good in Remastered. They really did fix it quite well, guys. They really did such a good job in fixing that ore harvester AI. But shorter distance overall, I think, for Dynamic. We'll have to see if that actually translates into anything. Longer the distance your trucks have to drive, the worse it is for you overall. BikeRushOwnz most likely also going to be scraping his way up to the north side and building out his base, crawling his way up there. And of course, Dynamic is going to presumably do the same thing. He hasn't dropped any kind of silos or power plants to start base crawling his way up north just yet, but we do expect to see that. BikeRushOwnz, pretty decent vision all around the map, and Dynamic significantly less. Basically nothing over here on this right side, which is kind of surprising considering, you know, that's a potential attack path of BikeRushOwnz. Of course, as these two guys start trading blows, they're going to be have a little bit more vision around the map. There are the silos and a power plant, as well as both players are starting to head out towards that kind of natural expansion. BikeRushOwnz driving around with a light tank on the left side of the map. But man, the first couple of minutes of this game, not a whole lot has happened in terms of fighting, but these two guys are getting themselves set up. That tank drives forward, gets the crush on a couple of riflemen, but it ultimately gets destroyed by BikeRushOwnz, so he basically gets a free tank kill there. I don't know if that's going to bode well for Dynamic. If he keeps on that kind of pressure, then BikeRush will have a pretty easy game. We'll have to see. Ore getting destroyed, and this is a lot of the ore that's close to the refinery as well, which is a bit unfortunate for BikeRushOwnz. Dynamic running around with these tanks. He's going to be going for one harvester. At the same time, BikeRushOwnz is going to be able to clean up the tanks of Dynamic, and sometimes this allows the player who's killing the tanks to snowball forward and have just a superior tank number, but I don't know if it's actually enough for BikeRush to run across the map and do real damage to Dynamic. How much money just got destroyed just in pure number of tank shots? That was a lot of cash down the drain for BikeRushOwnz. I mean, that's a significant amount of ore just eliminated off of the face of this map. Dynamic, on the other hand, is just now setting up his refinery up in the north. He's going to be able to have a shorter run here as well as there for that ore. He's going to have a better setup for the late game. Dynamic coming back in here. BikeRushOwnz has the better tank numbers. He's getting a good surround and a good destroy on these tanks. Sometimes the tanks manage to escape with just a sliver of health, but BikeRushOwnz is doing a pretty good job of finishing off the tanks of Dynamic. Dynamic doing the same job, doing the same thing, killing off the tanks of BikeRush efficiently, not letting them escape with just a bit of health. Sometimes players do manage to micro them back, and Dynamic starting to overwhelm the tanks of BikeRushOwnz. BikeRushOwnz going to retreat a little bit here, match back up with some reinforcements coming down from his war factories. BikeRushOwnz also has one, now two pillboxes there waiting for the tanks of Dynamics, and they're actually just gonna, they know that the other guy is there, and they're just choosing to drive past each other. One pillbox down for Dynamic. BikeRushOwnz, on the other hand, gonna be going for, I guess, the war factory of Dynamic, pushing right in, and it's the MCV is the target of Dynamic. He's driven past all of the infrastructure. He's driven past everything of BikeRushOwnz. BikeRushOwnz gets a little bit of a sail of that MCV, but the power plant's now going to be going down. The production slowed. It's going to be the refinery and the war factory on the other side for BikeRushOwnz. He's going to be cleaning up the infrastructure of Dynamic, but it's a base race scenario between these two, light tank versus light tank, and Well, now no MCV versus no MCV as BikeRushOwnz targets the MCV of dynaMic, and dynaMic trying to get out the last couple of pillboxes as he himself cleans up all of the buildings of BikeRushOwnz, and dynaMic has so much less distance to travel. He cleaned up the MCV and the expansion in the north, and now it's just this little cluster of buildings there in that kind of southern position for BikeRushOwnz. 2 war factories and a refinery as dynaMic has so many more buildings spread throughout this map, pillboxes as well, silos and power plants, everything on the side of dynaMic is so much more spread out than BikeRushOwnz, and BikeRushOwnz with just this 1 refinery left. dynaMic is going to jump on it. He's going to go for the kill. He doesn't care about the tanks. It doesn't matter if they die as long as he gets this 1 refinery, and that is it. BikeRushOwnz with no buildings left taps out. How close did BikeRush get? Oh, not close at all. Oh, he's still at 3 barracks, 3 power plants, and 2 silos. Those pillboxes putting out some serious damage for dynaMic. BikeRush had a decent number of tanks. I mean, 7 light tanks, but wow, that base race really favoring dynaMic. Jumping on the MCV and then going up to the north and just making his way down south, cleaning up every single building as he goes. Maybe dynaMic just had more tanks overall. Similar numbers of units killed. I mean, Rifleman would account for the difference between those, so relatively even game overall, but BikeRushOwnz just not able to survive the base race. That will do it for game number 2. Let's jump into game number 3, which takes us to Arena Valley Extreme. I think has extra ore mines or extra, gems, extra ore fields in general. Wow, just right out of the gate, definitely the biggest of the 3 maps that we have seen, these 3 random replays from these guys. In the north, as the Yellow Germany, this is IamDyNaMic. And in the south, as the Cyan UK, this is BikeRushOwnz. dynaMic vs. BikeRush has been a fireworks of a series, just explosions all over the place, action almost non-stop between these guys. But now that we are on an absolutely gigantic map, I think things might slow down a little bit more. Canyon and Bullseye are definitely much smaller feeling, and I think overall just maybe have fewer attack paths. There's so much splitting up with the terrain of these various attack paths. Even this little, this river, providing a little bit of break up to the terrain over here on the right side. There's so much space. So much space on this map. Now, of course, allies versus allies, lots of light tanks, a couple of medium tanks, but that's pretty much all we've been seeing is these infantry battles, which lead into light tank battles, and that's pretty much the name of the game. Definitely nice to grab a Red Alert and a Tibdon match every once in a while, but the endless tank spam means variety is nice. Oh, that Rifleman getting crushed by the Harvester. Not even trying, just manages to get the kill anyways. BikeRush losing 4 or 5 Riflemen there to that Ore Harvester and that single Rifleman there. Just a little bit of early game scouting from both players, doing what they can to expand their vision and see every corner of the map. I'm actually not sure. I don't remember how the spawns work. I know some of these maps have like 100 different spawn locations, and so even though you're playing a 1v1, sometimes you spawn quite close to each other. If this is on ladder, if these were ladder matches, then this might actually be like a forced cross spawns kind of scenario, or a limited spawn scenario where they end up spawning in only a handful of different locations. You don't get the super close together spawns. But in this case, cross spawns, so they are as far apart as they possibly can be with the most amount of ore potentially under their control. BikeRushOwnz expanding to the north, also sending a couple of tanks to the north. dynaMic definitely has the tank numbers. This little group of 6 or 7 tanks that BikeRushOwnz is sending out. dynaMic definitely has more tanks ready and waiting. Of course, Defender's advantage means that dynaMic will have an easier time holding off these tanks, but BikeRushOwnz maybe looking to find an opening, find an angle that dynaMic isn't quite at yet, and then punch in there and try and do some damage. And of course, as we've seen in other Red Alert games, you can sometimes just run past the tanks of your opponent and go for the infrastructure kill. In this case, it's not quite working out. BikeRushOwnz even kind of getting caught a little bit by the tanks of DynaMic, and DynaMic may actually be able to clean up 2 or 3 of the tanks of BikeRushOwnz. No, I guess not. DynaMic actually turns around. BikeRushOwnz perhaps trying to sneak by with some other units, but DynaMic turns back around. He's going to be able to snatch up a couple more tanks of BikeRushOwnz. DynaMic with 14 kills versus the 9 of BikeRushOwnz, and a decent number of those will start to be tanks. I think right now most of them are infantry, but as time goes on, I think more and more of them are going to be those tanks. DynaMic gobbling up more and more tanks of BikeRushOwnz forming up a little bit of an army here on the right side. He's going to be going for this refinery. The rifleman getting cleaned up as BikeRushOwnz swings in with the tanks. He may be able to gun down this refinery, but there's so many reinforcements here for DynaMic. 1 refinery down, but what is the cost? Even a medium tank in here getting cleaned up as DynaMic is just going for the kill on these units. He doesn't want them to escape. The body blocking isn't good enough to totally disrupt the retreat path of BikeRushOwnz, but BikeRushOwnz will be losing 1 additional tank. No, it's going to be 5-6 tanks on the left side coming in, and that is where DynaMic pulls his army back over to the left side. The radar dome is going to be the thing under attack as BikeRushOwnz tries to get more value out of these tanks, more of them getting trapped behind enemy lines, and DynaMic is just crushing the army of BikeRushOwnz. 4 more tanks in the north. BikeRushOwnz trying to do this multi-pronged attack thing. Little pockets of tanks here and there striking into the heart of DynaMic and doing critical damage, except he's not actually getting to the heart. DynaMic is just blocking every attack, splitting his army too well, pulling this way and that. I mean, losing a refinery is annoying, sure. But, well, he just got another MCV. Yeah, he just built that MCV out of the war factory, so he is actually going to have 2 war factories, and he is just absolutely crushing the tanks of BikeRushOwnz. BikeRushOwnz has tried to do this cutesy little, like, attack in different locations thing, and sometimes that does work. In fact, in many cases, you can skirt by with 5 or 6 tanks, get deep into your opponent's base, and kill an MCV just like this before they have an opportunity to respond, but that's his 2nd MCV. That guy is expendable. You don't have to worry about killing off that MCV. You need to do way more than that. The 2nd MCV under threat as BikeRushOwnz is going to be pushing forward and going for it, but so many tanks are going down. I mean, 74 kills versus the 27 of BikeRushOwnz. 84 kills versus the 27 of BikeRushOwnz. Another refinery going down right on the front line, right in the face of BikeRushOwnz, and DynaMic is just slaughtering. These numbers are so bad for BikeRushOwnz. Now, in the past, we have seen some games where a person produces a big swell of units, sometimes selling off a bunch of buildings and getting a bunch of infantry, and then they're just able to punch through and win a base race. But that is becoming increasingly difficult with just the sheer numbers that DynaMic has. Every engagement turns further and further in his favor, and BikeRushOwnz is trying to create opportunities where DynaMic might make mistakes, where BikeRushOwnz can capitalize on an opening in DynaMic's armor, but it's just not happening. DynaMic is too thorough. DynaMic is too good in this case. And BikeRushOwnz losing even more tanks again. He's trying to make something happen. He's trying to split the army of DynaMic, but his reinforcements carelessly going through the middle of the map, taking so much damage for free, unanswered. The tanks of DynaMic getting so many shots off against the tanks of BikeRushOwnz, and BikeRushOwnz is going to stop the base creep in the south of DynaMic's base. I guess it's still in the north of the map, but he's going to stop the base creep there to that southern field below DynaMic's main. And instead, DynaMic is going to go straight for the harvesters of BikeRushOwnz. He pulls them down to the south. BikeRushOwnz trying to curb the tide, trying to stop the attack. 3-4 pillboxes on the front line as BikeRushOwnz continues to produce light tank after light tank. Harvesters absorbing some of the damage here. DynaMic going to be reforming his front line over here to the left, and actually an expansion of BikeRushOwnz. His MCV over here completely exposed. There's the sell-off of the MCV, and even a power plant gets eliminated. And I think, no, that is a 2nd MCV of BikeRushOwnz, so he does still have an MCV. He is still trying to expand up to the north, but I don't know that that's really going to be working out for him. These pillboxes are his defensive hope. This is so many tanks for Dynamic, so many mediums, so many lights, so much carnage, and BikeRushOwnz has nothing left to stand on. The overwhelming numbers of Dynamic will not be stopped. And that will do it for game number 3. Dynamic just overwhelming BikeRushOwnz. BikeRushOwnz almost able to break through and do that critical damage to Dynamic, but never actually able to finish off those buildings. Dynamic was too good on the defense. The map was too big, and BikeRushOwnz had too few tanks. And that will do it for this 3-game series between these two players. Just 3 random replays, 3 entertaining, action-packed replays to be sure. But that will do it for this video. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And this is Sybert, signing out.